She was hours away from her execution, but one request from the female inmate stopped a New York police officer in his tracks. No one expected him to say yes, and what happened next shocked everyone inside those walls. Stay with me until the end, because this isn't just about rules or justice. It's about humanity. And don't forget to like the video, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after it ends. Officer Marcus Thompson had been working at Riverside Correctional Facility for 8 years. At 34, he was respected by his colleagues, trusted by his supervisors, and known for following protocol without question. His uniform was always pressed, his reports always filed on time, and his interactions with inmates remained strictly professional. That was Marcus, steady and reliable. The kind of officer who never caused problems or made waves. But on that cold February morning, everything changed. The facility buzzed with unusual tension. Death row executions were rare in New York, and this particular case had drawn media attention from across the state. The inmate was Elena Rodriguez, a 29-year-old woman who had been convicted of murder 3 years earlier. Her case had divided public opinion, with some believing she deserved her fate, while others argued for clemency. Marcus had worked death row before, but something felt different this time. Maybe it was the way the other officers whispered in the hallways, or how the warden held longer meetings behind closed doors. The weight of what was about to happen seemed heavier than usual. Elena had been moved to the holding cell closest to the execution chamber 2 days prior. Standard procedure required constant supervision, and Marcus drew the morning shift on her final day. He expected silence, maybe some crying, perhaps anger. What he didn't expect was the woman he found sitting calmly on her narrow bed, reading a worn paperback novel. She looked up when he approached, her dark eyes meeting his through the bars. There were no tears, no visible signs of panic, just a quiet dignity that caught him off guard. "Good morning, Officer Thompson," she said, glancing at his name tag. Her voice was steady, almost conversational. "Morning," he replied, maintaining his professional distance. The handbook was clear about limiting conversations with death row inmates, especially on execution day. Elena returned to her book, but Marcus found himself stealing glances at her throughout the morning. She read for hours, occasionally pausing to stare at the small window near the ceiling. When lunch arrived, she thanked the guard who delivered it and ate slowly, as if savoring each bite. It was around 2 in the afternoon when she finally spoke again. "Officer Thompson," she called softly. He walked closer to her cell, staying just outside the designated safety zone. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, though every instinct told him to keep walking. "Do you have children?" she asked. The question surprised him. Marcus had 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9, but inmates didn't need to know about his personal life. "Ma'am, I can't discuss personal matters." Elena smiled sadly. "I understand. I was just wondering if you knew what it felt like to love someone more than your own life." Marcus remained silent, but something in her tone made him listen. "I have a daughter," she continued, her voice growing softer. "Her name is Sophia. She's 6 years old, and she's been living with my sister since I've been here. She doesn't understand why Mommy can't come home." The officer felt his chest tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Elena stood and walked to the bars, stopping just inches away from him. "Officer Thompson, I know you're not supposed to get involved with inmates. I know you have rules to follow, but I need to ask you something, and it might be the most important favor anyone has ever requested from you." Marcus looked around the corridor. They were alone, but security cameras recorded everything. Whatever she was about to ask, he needed to be careful. "I'm listening," he said quietly. Elena reached into the pocket of her orange jumpsuit and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She held it between the bars, close enough for him to take if he chose to. "This is a letter I wrote to my daughter. It explains everything she needs to know about who I am, who her father was, and how much I love her. My sister thinks Sophia is too young to understand, so she won't give it to her. But someday, When Sophia asks questions about me, I want her to have this. Marcus stared at the letter, his hands remaining at his sides. Elena continued, tears finally appearing in her eyes. I'll be gone. My sister will probably never mention my name again. She thinks it's better that way, to let Sophia forget I existed, but I can't let that happen. I can't leave this world knowing my daughter will grow up thinking her mother abandoned her or didn't love her enough to fight. The paper trembled slightly in Elena's hand. Officer Thompson, my final wish isn't for freedom or forgiveness or even mercy. My final wish is for my daughter to know that her mother loved her until the very last breath. Will you please make sure she gets this letter when she's old enough to understand? Marcus found himself looking into the eyes of a mother facing death, and for a moment, the uniform and the bars and the rules seemed to fade away. This wasn't about the crime she'd committed, or the justice system, or even his job. This was about a mother's love for her child. But taking that letter would violate every protocol he'd sworn to uphold. It would cross professional boundaries he'd never crossed before. It could cost him his job, his pension, maybe even result in criminal charges if anyone discovered what he'd done. Elena must have seen his hesitation because she pressed the letter closer to the bars. I know what I'm asking you to risk. I know it's not fair to put this on your shoulders, but I've watched you these past few days, and I can see you're different from the others. You look at us like we're still human beings, not just case numbers waiting to die. Marcus glanced at the security camera mounted in the corner. The red light blinked steadily, recording everything. His training kicked in, reminding him of the consequences, the investigations that would follow, the questions he'd have to answer. But then he thought about his own daughters, about bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, and the fierce love that consumed him every time he looked at them. What would he want someone to do if he were the one facing death and his children needed to know how much their father loved them? The letter hung in the air between them, representing a choice that would define not just Sophia's future, but Marcus's character. In that moment, Officer Thompson realized that sometimes being human mattered more than following rules. His hand moved slowly toward the bars. Marcus hesitated for what felt like an eternity, his fingers hovering just inches from the folded paper. The corridor was silent except for the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the soft tick of the wall clock counting down Elena's final hours. I can't promise anything, he whispered, his voice barely audible, but I'll see what I can do. Elena's eyes filled with tears as Marcus carefully took the letter and slipped it into his uniform pocket. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you for seeing me as more than just an inmate number. Marcus stepped back from the bars, his heart pounding. What had he just done? In 8 years of service, he'd never bent the rules, let alone broken them completely. But something about this moment, about this woman's desperate love for her child, had touched a part of him he'd kept buried beneath his professional facade. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Marcus tried to focus on his duties, but the letter seemed to burn against his chest. Every time another officer spoke to him, he wondered if they could somehow sense what he'd done. When the warden walked past during his rounds, Marcus felt certain the man could read the guilt written across his face. At 4:30, the official witnesses began arriving. A chaplain, 2 lawyers, a doctor, and a handful of reporters filed through the security checkpoints. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute. Marcus had witnessed 3 executions during his career, and the ritual was always the same: quiet efficiency, clinical procedures, and the strange, suffocating silence that followed. Elena spent her final hour reading the same book she'd held all morning. When the chaplain offered to pray with her, she politely declined. When the warden asked if she had any last words for the record, she simply said, "Tell my daughter I love her more than all the stars in the sky." As they prepared to move her to the execution chamber, Elena caught Marcus's eye one final time. She mouthed the words, "Thank you," and he gave her the slightest nod in return. The execution proceeded without incident. Marcus stood at his assigned post, watching as Elena Rodriguez took her final breath at exactly 6:17 p.m. The witnesses filed out quietly. The media representatives hurried to file their reports, and the facility slowly returned to its normal evening routine. But for Marcus, nothing felt normal anymore. That night, he sat in his kitchen staring at the letter Elena had given him. His wife Sarah noticed his unusual quietness during dinner, and his daughters Emma and Lucy kept asking why Daddy seemed so sad. He made excuses about a difficult day at work, but the truth was more complicated than he could explain. The letter was addressed simply to my beautiful Sophia. Marcus turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of the promise he'd made to a dying woman. He thought about Elena's sister, who believed it was better for Sophia to forget her mother completely. He thought about the little girl who would grow up with questions that might never be answered. Most of all, he thought about his own daughters and how he would feel if someone stood between them and a final message from him. Over the next few weeks, Marcus couldn't shake the memory of Elena's final request. He tried to return to his normal routine, but the letter remained hidden in his desk drawer at home, a constant reminder of the choice he'd made and the promise he still needed to keep. He began researching Elena's case, reading old newspaper articles and court transcripts during his off hours. What he discovered surprised him. Elena had been convicted of killing her abusive boyfriend after years of documented domestic violence. The case had been controversial because many believed she'd acted in self-defense, but the jury had seen it differently. The more Marcus learned about Elena's story, the more complex his feelings became. She wasn't the cold-blooded killer he'd imagined. She was a woman who'd made a desperate choice to protect herself and her daughter from a dangerous man. The system had failed her, just as it might now fail Sophia if no one stepped in to bridge the gap between a mother's love and a child's need to understand her past. 2 months after Elena's execution, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He requested time off and drove 3 hours upstate to the small town where Elena's sister Maria lived with 6-year-old Sophia. The neighborhood was quiet and middle class, with neat lawns and children's bicycles scattered on driveways. Marcus found the address he'd obtained through careful research and sat in his car for 20 minutes, gathering courage for what he was about to do. When Maria answered the door, she looked confused and slightly alarmed to see a police officer standing on her porch. Marcus quickly explained who he was and why he'd come, watching her expression shift from confusion to anger to something that might have been relief. She never stopped asking about her mother, Maria admitted, inviting Marcus inside. I keep telling her that Elena is gone and won't be coming back, but Sophia wants to know why. She wants to know if it was something she did wrong. Marcus sat in the modest living room, surrounded by Sophia's drawings and school projects. The little girl was at a neighbor's house, giving him and Maria privacy to talk. He explained about Elena's final wish and the letter she'd written, carefully leaving out the details of how he'd obtained it. Maria listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was protecting her, she whispered. I thought it would be easier if she just forgot. Marcus pulled the letter from his jacket pocket and placed it gently on the coffee table between them. Elena wanted Sophia to understand that her mother loved her, he said quietly. She wanted her to know the truth when she was old enough to handle it. Maria stared at the letter for a long time before picking it up with trembling hands. She's been having nightmares, she said finally. She draws pictures of a woman with dark hair and always asks if that's what her mommy looked like. I show her old photos, but she wants to know why mommy had to go away. The front door opened, and Sophia burst into the room with the energy only a 6-year-old could possess. She stopped short when she saw Marcus, her large, dark eyes studying his uniform with curiosity rather than fear. Are you a police officer? She asked, walking closer with the fearless confidence of childhood. I am, Marcus replied, smiling despite the heaviness in his chest. My name is Officer Thompson. Sophia looked exactly like her mother. Same dark eyes, same delicate features, same quiet intensity that seemed too mature for her age. But where Elena had carried the weight of her circumstances, Sophia radiated the innocent hope that only children possess. "Did you know my mommy?" Sophia asked, the question hitting Marcus like a physical blow. He glanced at Maria, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes, sweetie," he said gently. "I knew your mommy, and she asked me to tell you something very important." Sophia's eyes lit up with anticipation, and Marcus felt the weight of Elena's final wish pressing down on him. He knelt to Sophia's level, his voice gentle but steady. "Your mommy loved you very much," he said, watching as the little girl's face brightened. "She wanted me to make sure you always knew that, no matter what anyone told you." Maria wiped her eyes and moved closer. "Sophia, honey, Officer Thompson has something from your mommy, something she wrote just for you." Sophia's small hands clasped together. "From my mommy? Really?" Marcus looked at the letter in Maria's hands, then back at the eager child. "Your mommy wrote you a special letter before she went to heaven. She wanted you to have it when you were old enough to understand all the grown-up words." "Can I see it now?" Sophia asked, reaching toward the folded paper. Maria knelt beside her niece. "Sweetheart, this letter has some things in it that might be hard to understand right now. Maybe when you're a little older, like when you're 10 or 11, we can read it together." Sophia's face fell slightly, but she nodded with the acceptance children often show when adults explain things they don't fully grasp. "Will you keep it safe until then?" "I promise," Maria said, holding the letter close to her chest. "And I promise to tell you stories about your mommy, so you'll always know how special she was." Marcus watched this exchange, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. He'd kept his promise to Elena, but seeing Sophia's innocent face made the weight of everything that had happened feel even heavier. "Officer Thompson," Sophia said, tugging on his sleeve. "Did my mommy say anything else about me?" Marcus thought carefully about his words. "She said you were the most important thing in her whole world. She said you were smart and beautiful, and that she hoped you would grow up to be happy and strong." Sophia smiled, the kind of pure, joyful smile that only children possess. "I'm going to be a police officer like you when I grow up, so I can help people." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. Here was this little girl, who'd lost her mother in the most tragic circumstances, still wanting to help others. Elena would have been so proud. "That's a wonderful dream," he told her. "Your mommy would love knowing you want to help people." After spending another hour with Sophia and Maria, Marcus prepared to leave. Maria walked him to the door, the letter still clutched in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how you got this, and maybe I don't want to know, but thank you for caring enough to bring it here." Marcus nodded. Elena was a mother first, everything else second. That little girl deserves to know that. As he drove home that evening, Marcus felt something shift inside him. For the first time since Elena's execution, the heaviness in his chest began to lift. He'd crossed lines he never thought he'd cross, broken rules he'd always followed, but he'd also honored the final wish of a dying mother. When he arrived home, Sarah was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and worried eyes. "You've been different since that execution," she said gently. "Do you want to talk about it?" Marcus sat across from his wife, looking at the woman who'd stood by him for 12 years. He thought about Elena, about Sophia, about the letter that would someday help a little girl understand her mother's love. There was an inmate, he began slowly, a mother who just wanted her daughter to know she was loved. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "And you helped make that happen, didn't you?" Marcus squeezed her fingers. "I did something I probably shouldn't have done, something that could have cost me everything. But you did it anyway," Sarah said, "and it wasn't a question." "I kept thinking about Emma and Lucy," he admitted. "If something happened to me, I'd want someone to make sure they knew how much I loved them." Sarah smiled, the kind of understanding smile that comes from years of marriage to a man with a strong moral compass. "You did the right thing, Marcus. Rules are important, but humanity matters more." Over the following months, Marcus found himself changed by the experience. He still followed protocol, still maintained professional boundaries, but he saw the inmates differently now. They weren't just case numbers or security risks. They were human beings with stories, with families, with love and pain and hope just like everyone else. He started volunteering with a program that helped children of incarcerated parents. He read to them, listened to their worries, and helped them write letters to their mothers and fathers. Each time he saw a child's face light up when they talked about their parent, he thought of Sophia and the letter that waited for her. 3 years passed. Marcus received a promotion to sergeant. His daughters grew taller and smarter, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. But he never forgot about Elena Rodriguez or the promise he'd made in that prison corridor. Then, one spring afternoon, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Maria's number. "Officer Thompson? It's Maria, Elena's sister." Marcus's heart skipped. "Is everything okay? How's Sophia? She's 9 now," Maria said, and her voice carried a mix of nervousness and determination. "She's been asking more questions about her mother lately. Harder questions. I think it might be time." "Time for the letter?" "Yes. Would you be willing to come here when I give it to her? I think it might help, having you explain how you knew Elena." Marcus looked out his office window at the prison yard, where inmates walked in their daily circles. "Of course," he said. "When? This weekend, Saturday afternoon. If that works for you, I'll be there." That Saturday morning, Marcus woke with butterflies in his stomach. He'd faced dangerous inmates, prison riots, and life-threatening situations. But the thought of watching a 9-year-old girl read her mother's final words terrified him. He drove the familiar route to Maria's house, passing through small towns and rolling hills that looked different in the spring sunlight. When he knocked on the door, Sophia answered, now taller and more mature, but still carrying her mother's eyes and gentle spirit. "Officer Thompson!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his waist in an unexpected hug. "Aunt Maria said you're here for something special." Marcus hugged her back, marveling at how much she'd grown. "I am, sweetheart. Your aunt has something very important to share with you today." They gathered in the same living room where Marcus had first delivered the letter 3 years earlier. Sophia sat between Marcus and Maria on the couch, her legs swinging with nervous energy. "Sophia, honey," Maria began, her voice shaking slightly. "Do you remember when Officer Thompson told you that your mommy wrote you a special letter?" Sophia nodded eagerly. "You said I could read it when I was older. Am I old enough now?" Maria looked at Marcus, who gave her an encouraging nod. "We think you are. But before I give it to you, I want to make sure you understand that this letter might have some sad parts in it. Your mommy was going through some very difficult things when she wrote it." "I understand," Sophia said with the seriousness only children can muster when they know something important is happening. Maria reached into a wooden box on the coffee table and pulled out Elena's letter, now carefully preserved in a protective sleeve. She handed it to Sophia with trembling fingers. "Take your time, sweetheart. And remember, if you have any questions, Officer Thompson and I are right here." Sophia unfolded the letter carefully, her young eyes scanning the familiar handwriting of a mother she barely remembered. As she read, her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to understanding to tears. Marcus watched, his own eyes growing moist as he saw Elena's words come alive through her daughter's reaction. The letter was everything a mother's final message should be, full of love, explanations, and hopes for the future. When Sophia finished reading, she looked up at Marcus with tears streaming down her cheeks. "She says she made a mistake, but that she was trying to protect me. She says she's sorry she can't be here to help me grow up." Marcus moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Your mommy made some choices that had big consequences, but everything she did was because she loved you so much. She wanted you to be safe and happy." Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "She says in the letter that she hoped I would grow up to help people, just like I told you I wanted to be a police officer." "That's right," Marcus said, smiling through his own tears. "She believed you would grow up to make the world better." Sophia looked down at the letter again, then back at Marcus. "Officer Thompson, thank you for keeping your promise to my mommy. I know she's watching from heaven, and I know she's happy that her letter finally found me." In that moment, Marcus understood that everything he'd risked had been worth it. The broken rules, the sleepless nights, the weight of carrying Elena's secret. All of it had led to this moment when a little girl finally understood how deeply she was loved. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of that small house, three people sat together, connected by love, loss, and the power of a mother's final wish. Elena Rodriguez had been gone for 3 years, but her love lived on in the words she'd written and in the heart of the daughter who would carry her memory forward. Marcus realized that sometimes the most important part of serving and protecting had nothing to do with uniforms or badges or following every rule. Sometimes it meant seeing the humanity in everyone, even those society had given up on, and choosing compassion over protocol when it mattered most. Sophia held the letter close to her chest, her small fingers tracing the edges of the paper that carried her mother's love across time. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the distant sound of children playing outside. "Officer Thompson," Sophia said, looking up at him with eyes that seemed older than her 9 years. "Will you tell me more about my mommy? What was she like when you knew her?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. He glanced at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. "Your mother was brave," he said carefully. "Even when she was scared, she was thinking about you. She talked about your smile, about how smart you were, about how proud she was to be your mommy." Sophia wiped her nose with her sleeve. "In the letter, she says she used to sing to me when I was little. Do you think she's still singing to me now, from heaven?" Maria reached over and smoothed Sophia's hair. "I think she is, sweetheart. Every night when you go to sleep, I think she's watching over you and humming those same songs." The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Marcus found himself thinking about Elena's final hours, how she'd maintained her dignity even as death approached. He wondered if she could have imagined this moment, her daughter finally reading her words, finally understanding the depth of a mother's love. Sophia suddenly stood up, clutching the letter to her chest. "I want to write her back," she announced. "I want to tell her about school and my friends and how I'm learning to ride a bike without training wheels." Maria's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Oh, honey, that's a beautiful idea. We could write letters to Mommy and keep them in a special box. And maybe," Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger, "maybe someday when I'm a police officer like Officer Thompson, I can help other kids who miss their mommies and daddies." Marcus felt his chest swell with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud of that dream, Sophia. She would love knowing that you want to help people." Over the next hour, Sophia peppered Marcus with questions about his job, about helping people, about what it meant to be brave when things got scary. He answered each question thoughtfully, seeing in her curiosity the same fierce intelligence Elena had possessed. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus knew it was time to leave. He had a 3-hour drive ahead of him, and Sarah was making dinner for their family. But saying goodbye to Sophia felt like closing a chapter he wasn't quite ready to finish. Sophia hugged him tightly at the door. "Thank you for bringing me my mommy's letter," she whispered. "Thank you for keeping your promise." Marcus knelt down to her level one last time. "Sophia, I want you to remember something important. Your mommy made some difficult choices, but she made them out of love for you. As you grow up, you might hear people say things about her that aren't kind, but you have her letter now, and you know the truth about how much she loved you. I'll remember," Sophia said solemnly, "and I'll make her proud." As Marcus drove home that evening, he felt a sense of closure he hadn't expected. The letter had found its way to Sophia, Elena's final wish had been fulfilled, and a little girl now understood that she was loved beyond measure. But the story didn't end there. Over the following years, Marcus stayed in touch with Maria and Sophia. He sent birthday cards, attended Sophia's school plays, and watched her grow into a remarkable young woman. True to her word, Sophia excelled in school, particularly in her social studies and civics classes. She wrote essays about justice and fairness, about helping people who couldn't help themselves. When Sophia turned 16, she called Marcus with exciting news. She'd been accepted into a youth police academy program, a summer camp that introduced teenagers to law enforcement careers. "Officer Thompson," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement, "I got in. I'm going to learn about being a police officer just like you." Marcus smiled, remembering the 6-year-old who declared her dream in Maria's living room. "Your mother would be over the moon, Sophia. She'd be so proud of the woman you're becoming." The program was rigorous, designed to give young people a realistic view of police work. Sophia threw herself into every aspect of it, from physical training to conflict resolution to community policing strategies. Her instructors noted her maturity, her empathy, and her unusual understanding of how the justice system affected families and communities. On the last day of the program, Sophia gave a presentation about her career goals. Standing before her fellow participants and several veteran officers, she spoke about her mother's story and how it had shaped her desire to serve others. Years later, Sophia graduated at the top of her police academy class. Officer Marcus Thompson stood in the audience, watching as Elena's daughter took her oath to serve and protect. In her graduation speech, Sophia spoke about a letter that changed her life and a police officer who chose humanity over protocol. She never mentioned her mother's crimes, only her love. Marcus realized that Elena's final wish had created something beautiful, a legacy of compassion that would ripple through countless lives. Sometimes the most important promises we make aren't written in policy manuals. They're written in the hearts of those who need hope most.